sound great at blues guitar as a beginner to intermediate? How do you make those generic blues licks stand out more and find your own blues style? And what two approaches, when you combine them both, give you the best blues lead structure? Questions will be answered throughout this video, and it's going to help bring you to the next level of your blues guitar playing. About how to play with the blues progression, how to add more weight to your licks, utilizing 7th chord inversions to help move across the fretboard, and all that fun stuff. Now there's going to be around 4 main things I'm going to be talking about, with some little tips and tricks between each one. The first 2 will be 2 types of approaches you can use when playing the blues. Third will be about using 7th chord inversions to use as a home base and to help you move around the fretboard. And finally, the 4th thing will be all about technique, how to add weight to your licks, and even how to add your own flair to give your soloing its own unique approach. Now, besides the obvious of already knowing your blues pentatonic scales, we're gonna go a little deeper and find some cool tricks to help you get out of those basic blues scale boxes. So if you're unfamiliar with the pentatonic or blues pentatonic scales, I definitely recommend learning them before watching this, because that's not what I'm gonna go over today. I'm gonna go, like I said, a little deeper. So with that being said, let's get right into it. Now, I know what you're thinking. You want to be able to solo all across the fretboard and without being repetitive when playing the blues. Blues is sort of a little bit about repetition, but there's many different ways where you can change up one lick and play it differently all across the board. If you're new to this or you're looking for a fresh start learning the blues, realistically, we're gonna have to be a little repetitive at first. Now, jumping into the first thing, which is the first approach, we're gonna learn how to play with that progression. So much so that you won't even need a backing track or chords to hear the progression changing during your solo. And how we're gonna practice with this is blues arpeggios. I'll first show you these arpeggio shapes, and then I'll teach you how to play them over the progression. So we're gonna learn these shapes as an A7 arpeggio. So we're gonna be starting the root as an A. Now, you can use these shapes in any key you want. That doesn't change at all. So we're gonna start on the 5th fret of the low E string, which is A, with our middle finger. Then we're gonna jump down to the A string with our pointer finger on the 4th fret, and then our pinky on the 7th fret. So we have... Then we're gonna jump down to the D string, pointer finger on the 5th fret, and our ring on the 7th fret. So... Then to finish off this arpeggio, our middle finger on the 6th fret of the G string, pointer on the 5th fret of the B string, pinky on the 8th fret of the B string, and then to finish it with our pointer finger on the 5th fret of the high E string. So slowly we have it like this. A little faster, we have it like this. Now that's what we're gonna play on the 1 chord of the 12-bar blues. So now once we go to that 4 chord, we're gonna play this arpeggio. Now technically in this case, that 4 chord is a D. Now we could simply just take this shape we learned and bring it right here to the root note on the 10th fret of the low E string and play that same scale. But it is nice to know where these other arpeggio shapes are at. So we're gonna start on the 5th fret of the A string, jump down to the D string with our pointer on the 4th, and then our pinky on the 7th. Then we're going to jump down to the G string, pointer finger on the 5th fret. Our ring finger is then going to go on the 7th fret. So we have this. Now, once we get to our ring finger on the G string, we're actually going to sort of bar on the B string because we're going to pluck the 7th fret of the B string right after that. So now that might be a little tough for you, but I definitely recommend learning it that way. It's just so much easier in the long run. And then to finish it, we're gonna have our pointer finger on the 5th fret of the high E string, and then our pinky on the 8th fret of the high E string as well. Now, luckily, when we get to that 5 chord, we can play either of those two arpeggio shapes. So for on that 5 chord, which is E, we could play it here, or we can play it here. Now, starting out learning this, I would recommend playing the first arpeggio shape I showed you over the 1 chord, so the, and then I would play that second arpeggio shape I showed you over both the 4 and 5 chord. So basically, after you get these shapes memorized, you can start to use them during your soloing. At first, it's going to sound very boxy, like I said, but the more you get comfortable with it, you'll eventually sort of fall out of that yourself. But also, the thing I'm going to get into now can help you with this as well. So that first approach helps you play along with the progression, but the problem with that is that doing too much of it just sounds very robotic, and there's no real humanity behind it, if that makes sense. This second approach is where we can start to get a little gritty with it, and when you combine these two approaches, this is when you start to get on the right road to great blues soloing. So during a 12-bar blues or any basic blues progression, especially when it's in major blues, we can use both the major and minor blues pentatonic over these progressions. So there's this sort of unwritten rule that you can play the minor blues pentatonic over a major chord or major 7th chord to give it a little extra flair, and this really doesn't work the other way around. So like you can't, not that you can't, but when you play a major blues scale over a minor chord or minor 7th chord, it doesn't work as well. So we're going to take this approach and run with it. I'm going to play you an example, and I want you to pay attention to the sound of the scales that I'm playing. Chord, I'm going to be playing the major blues. During the 4 chord, I'm going to switch to playing the minor blues instead. And then on the 5 chord, I'll either use the minor or major, whatever I'm sort of feeling. Now during the progression, go back and forth between playing the major and minor blues scales just to see what you prefer. You can keep playing the major blues scale the entire time and maybe sneak in that minor blues pentatonic once in a while. Like I said, there's no right or wrong. Unless it sounds terribly bad, then you're probably wrong. Now this approach sort of has a part 2 that I'll get to at the end, so I guess technically that's part 4. But basically, I'm going to say that you should go a little extra wild on this approach by using certain techniques that I'll talk about later. But before I get into that, I want to jump into using 7th chord inversions as a soloing tool. So earlier when I brought up the 7th chord inversions, I said it can help you move all across the fretboard. But they can also really highlight those chord changes. You can arpeggiate these 7th chord inversions that I'm about to show you. You can simply just strum them, or you can combine them with those other approaches that I talked about earlier. I'll show you an example now, and then I'll show you these 7th chord inversion shapes. See how I use them in different ways. Sometimes I simply just played the inversion when the chord changed, or I arpeggiated them and combined them with the blues scales or the blues arpeggio that I showed you earlier. So now I'm going to show you how to play these 4 7th chord inversions. Now I will say that there are definitely a lot more, but these are the ones that you can really start to use and kind of get a good grasp of. Now, just like those arpeggios, these shapes will work in any key. They don't change or anything like that. So here's what they all look and sound like. Now in this specific key, and starting on that root position right here, when we make our way up, it gets pretty high, so we can also play these 2 down here as well, and I'll show you that. So for the first one, we have our pointer on the 7th fret of the D string, our ring finger on the 9th fret of the G string, our middle on the 8th of the B string, and then our pinky on the 9th of the high E string. Now moving on to the second one, we have our middle is on the 11th fret of the D string, our ring finger is on the 12th fret of the G string, our pointer is on the 10th fret of the B string, and our pinky is on the 12th fret of the high E string. So for the first 2, we have now the next one, I'm going to show you how to play it in 2 places since this is pretty high up on the fretboard, but we're basically just barring the 14th fret on the D, G, B, and E strings, but our ring or pinky finger, whatever you prefer, is going to cover the 15th fret of the high E string. Now we can also play this all the way down here. We just bar the 2nd fret, put our pinky or ring finger on the 3rd fret of the high E string. Same chord. So starting from down here, you basically bar the 5th fret from the D string to the high E string down and put our middle finger on the 6th fret of the G string. And you can also slide that all the way up here, which would be the 17th fret barred, and our middle on the 18th. All right, so to wrap this lesson up, we have to talk about the most important thing: adding weight to your soloing and licks. This is what gives your solo its own unique voice. And the better you get with these techniques, the cooler your sound can be. I will say though, just because I'm being honest, this can take some time to really get down. Especially if you're a beginner, it's not gonna just happen right away. It's not gonna happen overnight. It can take a couple years even. There's players who've been playing for 50 years who are still developing these techniques and making them sound better and better, so it really never ends. I believe that tone really is in the fingers. If you're a really great player, the rig doesn't matter nearly as much. It's gonna sound much better than someone who just started playing guitar through the best rig in the world. But working at these techniques consistently, you'll have no problem at all. You just sort of have to get your fingers used to the slides, bends, and all these little tricks. Now, techniques like those definitely deserve a whole other video for themselves. So if you're interested in watching that video, please let me know down in the comments and subscribe to my channel. I'll release a part 2 of this maybe a couple weeks after this video gets posted. And if you want to check out other lessons or gear demos I do, you can check them out wherever they are, down in the description, whatever. I hope this video was helpful to you and your guitar playing, and thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.